In the hallways of a technology company, a black woman in a cleaner's uniform has been silently enduring the laughter, insults, and ridicule for weeks. But those who see themselves as noble and superior have no idea that the woman they have bullied and tried to fire during this time is actually the new owner of the company. And today, she is not here to mop the floors, she is here to sweep away the toxic culture that has taken root in her company. Amara Thompson had spent a lifetime proving people wrong. Growing up in the tough streets of Atlanta, she had learned early that success wasn't handed to people like her, it had to be wrestled from a world that constantly tried to push her back down. A black woman in the tech industry, she had clawed her way up from nothing, built her own empire. And now, she stood at the helm of one of the most powerful acquisitions of her career. Orion Tech, a name that once commanded respect but had since become synonymous with failure. She had read the reports. The financial decline, the plummeting stocks, the exodus of talent. But none of that told her the full story. She needed to see it for herself. She needed to understand why this company, once a beacon of innovation, had crumbled under its own weight. And so, she made a decision most CEOs wouldn't even consider: she would go undercover. Her advisors had balked at the idea. "Amara, this isn't necessary," her right hand Darius had warned. "You've already got the data. You don't need to scrub toilets to fix this place." But Amara knew better. Data could be manipulated. Numbers could lie. But people revealed their true selves when they thought no one important was watching. So, she became Maya Lewis, a cleaner hired through a third-party agency, given a cheap uniform, a mop, and the kind of invisibility that came with cleaning up after executives who thought they were gods. With her hair tucked under a worn-out cap and her usual designer suits replaced with faded work pants, she was just another black woman pushing a cart down the marble hallways of Orion Tech's corporate offices. And just like that, she ceased to exist. It didn't take long for the reality of the company's toxic culture to show itself. The first day, as she wiped down a conference table, a group of executives walked in. She stepped aside, keeping her head down, but that didn't stop the sneers. "Christ," one of them muttered, as he brushed past her. "I swear, every time I turn around, there's another one of them in here." Another man, tall, suited in navy, smirked. "What, you thought you'd get a break from affirmative action hires?" A few of them chuckled as they settled into their seats, not even bothering to lower their voices. Amara clenched her jaw, forcing her hands to remain steady as she wiped away imaginary dust from the tabletop. She had expected condescension. She had expected arrogance. But the sheer casualness of it, that was what stung. These weren't people who thought they were being cruel. They were people who didn't even register that someone like her had thoughts, emotions, a mind of her own. It got worse as the days passed. One morning, as she emptied a trash bin in the executive lounge, Eva Simmons, a sharp-featured blonde in a pencil skirt and 6-inch heels, watched her like she was an insect. "You missed a spot," she said flatly, pointing to an invisible speck on the floor. Amara bent down to scrub it, knowing exactly what this was: a power move. And it worked. The smirk on Eva's face widened. "You people always take your time, don't you?" she mused, sipping from her gold-rimmed coffee cup. "No sense of urgency, no work ethic. But I guess when you've spent generations living off handouts, it makes sense." The words hit Amara harder than she expected. Not because they were new, God knows. She'd heard worse, but because of how easily they rolled off Eva's tongue, like she had said the same thing 100 times before. Like it was fact. Amara straightened, meeting Eva's gaze. She wanted to say something, to remind this woman who the hell she was, but she swallowed it down. Now wasn't the time. Not yet. Later that evening, as she scrubbed a bathroom sink, she caught her own reflection in the mirror. This was a game of patience, she reminded herself. She was here to listen, to observe, to gather every ugly truth before she burned it all down. She turned off the faucet, wiped her hands dry, and pushed her cart back into the hallway. The storm was coming, and they wouldn't see it until it was too late. By the second week, the pattern had become painfully clear: people like her weren't meant to be seen. Amara had spent years in boardrooms, commanding the attention of men who underestimated her, forcing them to respect her through sheer force of will. But here, dressed in a cleaner's uniform, she had been erased. To these people she was a fixture, a shadow, an object that existed only to serve. and because they saw her as nothing, they spoke freely. The break room was a prime example, a place where the executives and upper management let their masks slip, where their words, dripping in privilege and casual disdain, bounced off the walls with no concern for who might be listening. Amara had started taking her lunch breaks there, not to eat. She barely touched the dry sandwich in her hands but to absorb. Today the conversation was particularly venomous. "Layoffs are coming," Ryan Carter, the CFO, announced as he leaned against the counter, stirring cream into his coffee like he was discussing the weather. "We need to make some deep cuts before the quarter ends. And frankly, I say we start with a dead weight." A few of them nodded in agreement, including Mark Holloway, a mid-level manager who had spent the past week making a show of avoiding standing too close to Amara, like blackness was contagious. "I mean, do we really need this many cleaners?" Mark mused, tapping his fingers on the counter. "It's not like the place is filthy. Hell, we could probably cut half of them, and no one would even notice." Eva Simmons, perched elegantly on one of the stools, smirked. "Oh, please, you know why they keep so many of them." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" Eva leaned in conspiratorially. "Optics," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Diversity quotas. Can't have the company looking too white or HR will throw a fit. So instead of hiring more talent in actual positions that matter, we fill the place with them." She took a sip of her latte and sighed dramatically. "It's exhausting, really." Laughter. Easy. Effortless. Like the statement had been nothing more than an inside joke. Amara's grip tightened on her cup. She forced herself to exhale slowly, to keep her expression neutral. She had spent a lifetime controlling her reactions, training herself not to flinch at the kind of bigotry that men like Ryan and women like Eva never had to second-guess. Then Mark turned his head, glancing toward her. His lips curled into a smirk. "Hey," he called out, waving a hand as if beckoning a dog. "Can we get a wipe down over here? We'd hate to have any messes lying around." The air in the room shifted. The other executives chuckled under their breath, amused by the performance. The unspoken expectation was clear she was supposed to obey. Amara didn't move. Mark's smirk faltered. He cocked his head, eyes narrowing, like he was waiting for her to acknowledge him. Amara tilted her head slightly, meeting his gaze with the kind of cold, quiet defiance that had made men in boardrooms sweat through their suits. But here, in this moment, she was just a cleaner. A nobody. Mark scoffed under his breath. "Figures," he muttered. "Lazy and stupid." The words slid under her skin like a blade. For a brief, dangerous second, she imagined all the ways she could destroy him. How easy it would be to pull out the documents proving she owned every inch of this building, to watch the smug arrogance on his face melt into horror as he realized who he had been demeaning. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. Instead, she turned, deliberately slow, and grabbed the rag from her cart. She made her way to their table, not because they had ordered her to, but because she wanted them to keep talking. As she wiped the already spotless counter, the conversation resumed around her, as if she weren't even there. "You know what kills me," Ryan mused. "They act like they're owed something, like the world is against them." Eva sighed. "It's the entitlement. They cry racism, but look at them always working the easiest jobs, always at the bottom." Amara bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. "You have no idea what the bottom looks like," she wanted to say. "You've never had to fight for your existence. You were handed this world, and you still think it owes you more." She pressed the rag harder against the surface, letting the sting in her jaw ground her. Then Ryan chuckled. "Well, they won't be our problem much longer. The layoffs are happening by the end of the month. And between you and me," he leaned in like he was sharing a dirty secret, "I'll be damned if we waste another cent keeping them around." Amara had heard enough. She straightened, dropping the rag onto the table with just enough force to make them blink. Eva's nose wrinkled, like the very proximity of her was offensive. "You're done here," she said, flicking a dismissive hand toward the door. Amara smiled. "A slow, measured thing." "Oh," she said, voice smooth as silk. "I'm just getting started." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving them laughing behind her. but soon, very soon, that laughter would die in their throats. The boardroom was already filling by the time Amara arrived. She kept her pace slow, steady, her fingers curling around the handle of her cart as she maneuvered it through the sleek glass doors. No one even looked up. They were too preoccupied with their own importance, too absorbed in their conversations about money, power, and whose head would roll next. She had spent 2 weeks being invisible, 2 weeks absorbing their arrogance, their cruelty, their smug certainty that the world was theirs to shape as they pleased. And now, standing at the edge of the room, the weight of their decisions hanging thick in the air, she knew she had reached the moment she'd been waiting for. At the head of the table, Ryan Carter leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, a predatory gleam in his eyes as he tapped a stack of printed reports against the table. "We're bleeding money," he announced, his voice carrying the same detached indifference as a man discussing the weather. "If we don't make significant cuts, we won't last another fiscal year. And we all know where we need to start." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Eva Simmons sipped her overpriced latte, her lips curving into a smirk. "I assume the janitorial staff is on the chopping block." Ryan scoffed. "Please. That's not even a discussion. We can outsource their jobs for half the cost." He waved a dismissive hand. "Hell, they should be grateful we kept them around this long. If they had any sense, they'd see the writing on the wall." Mark Holloway chuckled under his breath. "I doubt they can read it." Laughter. Low, knowing, easy. Amara stood still, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. But even now, even knowing how little they thought of people like her, it still burned. Ryan leaned forward, pressing his hands against the table. "We'll push the layoffs through by Friday. Spin it as restructuring. Efficiency. The usual." He smirked. "And if anyone whines, well, they're welcome to go protest in the streets like the rest of their kind." That was it. The moment. The match striking the fuse. Amara moved. Deliberate, controlled, not the hesitant shuffle of an invisible worker, but the steady stride of a woman who owned every inch of the ground she walked on. She reached the head of the table and stopped. Ryan frowned. "What the hell are you?" She placed a single manila envelope in front of him. The room went still. Slowly, Ryan picked it up, flipping it open with the same casual arrogance he did everything else. And then silence. Thick, suffocating. His face drained of color as his eyes scanned the words printed on the page. Eva leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed. "Ryan, what is it?" Ryan didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because staring back at him were the legal documents confirming the transfer of ownership. Orion Tech belonged to Amara Thompson. Her name was on every deed, every contract, every official record that mattered. And judging by the way his fingers tightened around the paper, the way his jaw locked and his breath hitched, he finally understood. The others were shifting now, their gazes bouncing between Ryan and Amara, confusion turning to unease. Mark scoffed. "What kind of joke is this?" Amara met his eyes, and smiled. "It's not a joke," she said smoothly, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "It's a reality check." Ryan finally looked up, his eyes wild. This isn't possible. You're a..." He stopped himself, but the word lingered in the air like poison. Amara arched an eyebrow. "Say it." Silence. Ryan swallowed hard. Eva was the first to recover, forcing a brittle laugh. "Okay, this is cute, really. But there's no way someone like you just..." Amara turned slightly, making a quick motion with her fingers. The door opened instantly. 2 security guards stepped inside. "Escort Mr. Carter out of the building," Amara said, her voice even controlled. Ryan's head snapped up. "You can't do this." Amara tilted her head. "Oh, but I can." Ryan stood so fast his chair scraped against the polished floor. "I've given years to this company." "And in return you drained it for your own benefit," Amara cut in, her tone razor sharp. You used it as your personal playground, while the real talent, the people who actually made this place run, were left scrambling for scraps. She took a step closer, her gaze unyielding. You were never a leader, Ryan. Just a parasite. The guards moved forward. Ryan stumbled back. This isn't over, he hissed. Amara smiled again, slow and knowing. Oh, sweetheart, it's been over since the moment I walked through that door. The guards took him by the arms. And then he was gone. A thick, stunned silence filled the room. Mark and Eva stared at her, expressions caught between shock and barely disguised panic. She took her time looking around the table, letting the weight of her presence sink in. You have a choice, she said finally, her voice quiet, lethal. You can adapt. Learn what real leadership looks like. Or she gestured toward the door where Ryan had just been dragged out. You can follow him. Eva's mouth opened, then closed. Mark swallowed hard. No one spoke. Amara straightened, adjusting the cuffs of her sleeves. Good. Now let's talk about how we're actually going to fix this company. And with that, she took her seat. At her table. In her company. And for the first time, they finally saw her. The silence that followed Ryan Carter's removal was thick, stretching across the boardroom like a loaded gun waiting to go off. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on every executive at the table, suffocating them beneath the realization that their world had just shifted, irrevocably. Amara let them sit in it. Let them stew in the discomfort, the humiliation, the fear clawing at the edges of their carefully constructed self-importance. She wanted them to feel the imbalance, to truly understand that the power they had wielded so effortlessly for years was no longer theirs to control. Eva Simmons, always the quickest to recover, cleared her throat and straightened in her chair, the ghost of a smirk still clinging to her lips. Well, she said, forcing a laugh that landed flat. That was dramatic. She adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse, flicking an imaginary speck of dust from her sleeve. But I assume you didn't drag us all here just for a show. Amara tilted her head slightly, eyes locked onto Eva's with a quiet intensity that sent an unmistakable warning. No, she said, her voice smooth as glass. I brought you here to make one thing very clear. She let the words settle, let them hang like a storm cloud before continuing. The days of this company being run by greed, by incompetence, by small-minded arrogance are over. Mark Holloway shifted in his seat, his usual smugness replaced by something wary, something uncertain. You can't just come in here and... I can, Amara cut in, her tone sharp enough to slice through his protest. And I already have. His mouth clamped shut. She exhaled slowly, placing both hands on the table as she surveyed the room. For weeks I watched. I listened. I saw exactly how you operate, and what I saw was a company rotting from the inside out. Her gaze flicked toward Eva, a culture built on exclusion, on arrogance, on the belief that some people are simply less valuable, less worthy, less human. She leaned forward, her voice dropping just slightly. I will not tolerate that. Not anymore. Eva scoffed. Oh, come on, let's not turn this into some activist lecture. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. This is business. We make decisions based on profit, not feelings. A slow smile spread across Amara's lips, one that carried no warmth. Interesting, she murmured. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your feelings, your biases, your assumptions are exactly what led this company to the edge of collapse. She tapped a manicured nail against the polished wood. You built an empire of glass, so convinced of your own superiority that you never noticed the cracks forming beneath you. Her gaze turned to Mark. You thought you could cut costs by gutting the workforce, by discarding the very people who keep this place running. But tell me, Mark, how do you expect a company to thrive when its foundation is crumbling? Mark's jaw clenched. This company was fine until... Until what? Amara challenged, her voice deceptively soft. Until you had to answer to someone you couldn't dismiss, someone who doesn't look like you, someone you can't shove into a corner and ignore. A muscle twitched in his jaw, but he said nothing. She sat back, crossing one leg over the other, exuding the kind of effortless authority they had spent their entire careers trying to manufacture. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "Effective immediately, we're shifting focus. No more reckless layoffs. No more outsourcing jobs just to pad the profit margins for shareholders who don't even set foot in this building. We're investing in innovation, in talent, in people." Eva scoffed again. "That sounds like a fantastic way to run this place into the ground." Amara's smile didn't falter. "Funny," she said, tilting her head. "That's exactly what I thought when I watched you run it." A few of the other executives, ones who had stayed silent, ones who had seen the writing on the wall, shifted uncomfortably. A few looked thoughtful. Amara continued. "Some of you will adapt. You'll learn how to operate in a company that values more than just the people at the top. You'll prove that you have something to offer beyond old money and empty suits." She let the implication settle. Others, she flicked her gaze toward the door where Ryan had been dragged out moments before, will find themselves with a choice. Mark exhaled through his nose, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests of his chair. "And what choice is that?" She met his gaze head on. "You can evolve. Or you can leave." Silence. Eva shifted, clearly weighing her options, her mind working to determine whether it was worth fighting, or if she could simply find a way to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Amara let all of them sit with the uncertainty of their futures. Then, finally, she stood. "The days of Orion Tech being a playground for people like you are done." Her voice was calm, steady, absolute. "This is my company now." And as she walked out of her boardroom, she didn't need to look back to know that, for the first time, they truly understood what that meant. The air felt different as Amara walked through the halls of Orion Tech, the click of her heels echoing against the polished floors. The weight that had pressed against her chest for weeks had shifted, not vanished but changed. This wasn't the end of the fight, far from it, but it was the first real step. As she passed the rows of cubicles, heads turned. The same employees who had once ignored her now looked, some with curiosity, some with uncertainty, and a few with something dangerously close to hope. Word had spread fast. They knew what had happened. They knew she wasn't just another executive sent to gut the company for profit. She had been one of them, walking these halls unseen, hearing their fears, feeling the weight of their exhaustion. She stopped at the janitor's closet. The door was slightly ajar, the sound of a mop sloshing against tile coming from inside. She knocked lightly against the frame. Gabriel Torres turned, startled. His brow furrowed at first, then his eyes widened slightly. He wiped his hands on his work pants, straightening. "Miss Thompson." Amara smiled. "It's Amara." He hesitated, then nodded. "Amara." She leaned against the doorframe. "Word is spreading." He huffed a quiet laugh. Understatement of the year. For the first time in weeks, Amara let herself exhale, let the exhaustion settle just enough to acknowledge it. She studied him for a moment, the man who had been overlooked, dismissed, just like so many others here. But he was sharp. She had seen it in the way he worked, the way he spoke to others, the way he understood exactly how this company functioned on a level none of the executives in that boardroom ever could. "I need people I can trust," she said simply. "People who see the cracks before they break everything apart. People who actually care." She let the words settle before adding, "You up for it?" Gabriel's lips parted slightly, but no words came. She saw it then, the conflict, the disbelief, the quiet dream of something bigger that he had never allowed himself to hope for. And then, finally, he nodded. Amara smiled. "Good. Let's get to work." As she turned to leave, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A woman, young, early 20s, stood near the break room, gripping a mop with fingers that had gone tense. Her uniform was identical to the one Amara had worn just days before. The girl's eyes darted away, as if afraid she had been caught watching something she shouldn't have. Amara approached, slow and measured. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then swallowed. "Mary," she said softly. Amara nodded. "Mary." A pause. Then, "How long have you been here?" 3 months, she said. Amara studied her, saw the way her shoulders curled inward slightly, the way she carried herself like someone used to shrinking, used to being made small. "You like working here?" Amara asked, keeping her voice even. Mary let out a short, brittle laugh before she could stop herself, eyes flicking up in panic like she had forgotten herself. She shook her head quickly. I mean, it's a job. Amara held her gaze. Not anymore. Mary blinked, confused. What? Amara smiled, but there was fire behind it. We're making some changes around here. And for the first time she saw a flicker of something Mary hadn't allowed herself to feel since she walked through these doors. Hope. Tch. Amara turned, making her way toward her office. Her office. The nameplate outside still bore the name of the man who had run this company into the ground. That would change by tomorrow. For now, she had work to do. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.